Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hello, friends. Welcome back to Learning to Glow. I'm so glad you're here. I have such a great episode for you. I have been telling my friends about this one. I'm like, I can't wait for you to hear Wednesday's episode because it's such an important one. And we are diving into the world of microbiome and how gut health truly impacts every part of our overall well-being and what to do about it, because you know, it gets discouraging when we hear about all of this and we don't know what we can do about it to make it better. So this episode, our guest is Martha Carlin. She's the founder of Biotic Quest, and she has such a great story. She shares how her journey into this science began after her husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and he was only 44 years old. So this led to a shift in her career, and she has built a science-driven company focused on gut health and chronic disease. We talk about how the microbiome is connected to issues like leaky gut, Parkinson's, diabetes, inflammation, and then all the things that lead to disruption, all the factors like diet, antibiotics, exercise, which is really fascinating when you hear that part, and so much more. It can even, support or it can disrupt our gut health. I learned so much in this episode, and I'm always looking for ways to improve my gut personally because that has been a real struggle in my life, and I've talked about that a little bit on the podcast. I just started some of their probiotics. It's called Sugar Shift, and I will give an update on that soon as well. But you can go check out Martha and the company by going to the show notes. I have it all linked there. And last week we hit 3 years of the Learning to Glow podcast. I hadn't talked about it because I've been sick. I'm still getting over my sickness, but I cannot believe how fast the time has gone. I can't believe it's been 3 years of releasing an episode every single Wednesday. And I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of the guests that we've had on and all the new information that I have learned, that we have learned. And it's just been so amazing. So if you are a regular listener, if you've had any value from this show, my only ask today is that you send this episode or the show in general to someone who has never heard of it before. I just want to get the word out, and I think sharing an episode that you love or something that someone in your life could benefit from is the best way. So thank you so much. Thank you for being here, each and every one of you who listen to this show. And send me any topics that you're interested in listening to or learning more about, any guests that you're interested in hearing from. Send me an email. My email is in the show notes as well. And thank you. Thank you so much. Here's to 3 more years. And here is Martha. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning to Glow podcast. Thanks for being with me. We have Martha Carlin with us today. Martha, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me, Jess. I'm excited to talk to you.
I am too. Before we get into our topic, which I'm very excited to talk about, I was hoping you could just introduce yourself a little, give us a little information about who you are, what you do, and then we can go from there.
Sure. So I am the founder of a company called the Bio Collective. We have a probiotics brand called Biotic Quest, but I came to this field from a very different space. My background was in accounting and business. I trained as an auditor, and in 2002, my 44-year-old husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's, and he was a healthy, marathon running, athletic, looked fine on the outside. So it didn't make any sense to me. And so I took my audit skills, examine the evidence for yourself. Don't believe anything anybody tells you. And I started to dig through the evidence of, what's going through our body, food, medicine, water, like all of the kind of pieces of the puzzle, trying to put that together. And that led me down a path to reading a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blaser. And he was talking about growing up in the age of antibiotics, which all of us have, and the impact that had on the increase in chronic disease. And that really resonated with me. I had never heard of the microbiome, that trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. And so I started down investigating what is this microbiome, and that led me ultimately to found a microbiome based science company, and then from there to go on to build products to try to restore our internal ecosystem through probiotics.
Oh my gosh. So 44, that's so young.
I mean, it really is very young, but one of the things that I've discovered on this journey is endurance athletes and the kind of stress and strain that they're putting on their body. That they may look very healthy on the outside, but there are a lot of things going on inside that you don't see that are degrading over time. And I think that's a major stressor that people don't think about, that while exercise is good for you, too much exercise is actually detrimental.
Oh, God. I want to talk about that too, because that's such a good point, especially for people who are really pushing themselves and their bodies to like the extremes. You look at those people and you think, I aspire to be as healthy as they are. And they're so athletic and they're so like their physical fitness is just at a level where I think I said this on the podcast the other day. I took a run with my son in the neighborhood and I was like, oh my God, I'll never do that again. That was so hard. It's hard on my body. Like I felt it in my knees. And, it's just, I'm older now than I used to be when I ran. So it's like, that's something that kind of, I think would play into the equation as well. But can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I feel like that's not really talked about as far as the strain that may cause to the body and what like ramifications are for that.
So one of the big ones, and often runners will say, like the day, like if they ran a marathon or something, like the next day, they'll just, they'll have a major crash. They'll often get sick. But so what happens when you're running, and these distance runs in particular, your blood is moving out into your muscles to oxygenate your muscles. And so it moves away from your GI tract, from digestion, from all of the lining of the gut. All that blood is going out into the major muscles that you're exercising. But what happens when you stop exercising is the blood rushes back in, and that causes something called reperfusion injury, which is actually the same thing that happens in a stroke when you get a blocked blood vessel, and then when it gets unblocked, you get reperfusion injury. So that's one of the main contributors to getting what's called leaky gut. A lot of people have heard of leaky gut, but they don't really understand, like, this is one of the ways you can get leaky gut is through this reperfusion of blood into those vessels in the stomach. So, another one of it's maybe a little less so now, but I think there's still a lot of endurance athletes who carb load. So they eat a very high carbohydrate diet because they need that fast energy. And then when they're on a distance run, they'll drink things like, Gatorade with fructose, or, the electrolyte drinks that are higher in glucose and fructose. And so they train their gut and their body to be a carb burner. And many of the bacteria that they're feeding can also be, that are more inclined to glucose and fructose, produce something called endotoxin, which also disrupts the gut. So when that reperfusion injury comes in and you get the leaky gut, then that endotoxin from the bacteria crosses over the gut into your blood supply, and it can really go anywhere in the body. And that's how you get, the inflammation, which could be in a joint if that's where your weakness is, or you can get inflammation in the brain, which is one of the factors in Parkinson's. So over time, that circulating inflammatory endotoxin and the repeated kind of cycle of that is, something that really isn't talked about. The other thing that isn't talked about is just the pounding, that kind of so actually things like cycling and rowing, where you're not doing that kind of physical pounding, because that's a pretty intense stressor in itself to the structures of the body.
Oh, okay. It's so interesting. You're right. Like it's never talked about. I've heard about the pounding, like that you're, the kind of the beating that your body can get over doing things like running. And that's why a lot of people choose biking instead, because you're not having that repetitive action. But that is so fascinating. So some of these things can actually lead to disrupting the gut, which I would have never thought about, how that could turn into a leaky gut. And then therefore you're saying like this leaky gut that we could have based on, I want to ask you that next, but some of the other causes that can disrupt our gut. But then it can then show up as so many different things. Like you said, what is our weakness? Like our joints, or, you said with your husband, with the brain. I was wondering if you could start here. So many things seem to be rooted in the gut, so many different chronic health issues. Can you talk more about that for us?
Well, it was really interesting to me how, like, allopathic medicine here in the US doesn't everything is sort of separated, and so they don't connect that. But if you look back historically in traditional Chinese medicine or in Ayurvedic medicine, which came out of India, those two are very much rooted in the understanding that most things are connected to the gut. And that can be the bacterial disruption, also the vagus nerve, which that's a major superhighway of signaling to all the organs. That is kind of where you get a gut feeling. So
Mm-hmm.
all of these little pieces are kind of tied back to the gut. But since back in 2015, when I started the BioCollective, we were collecting people's poop samples basically and looking at the differences across different diseases. So we put things in categories by a disease name, but if you start to look down at that microbiome level, you can start to see a lot of shared patterns of what the disruption in the microbiome is. And that can be a shift where you've got too much oxygen in the gut. If you think about it, it's a pipe inside, it shouldn't have oxygen in it. And so when the oxygen level gets too high, it feeds a more pathogenic profile of bacteria. They've also discovered, and I think they're pretty confident now, that a certain bacteria called Fusobacterium nucleatum, which is found in the mouth, is a cause of colon cancer. And they can tie that to some dietary profiles. But back to the endotoxin that I talked about, those gram-negative bacteria that produce endotoxin, that is an inflammatory molecule. But if you go into the research, serum endotoxin level is one of the best predictors of getting type 2 diabetes. It is also a mark, or it's used in animal models of Parkinson's, and there's a few papers out hypothesizing that endotoxin may be one of the primary drivers of Parkinson's. It's also evident in autism, in multiple sclerosis. And, you go down through the list of and depression. So depression, they've actually shown in studies within just a couple of minutes, with one injection of a tiny amount of this endotoxin from the gram-negative bacteria, can give somebody depressive symptoms in a matter of minutes.
Oh my gosh. That's so interesting. So when you're able to recognize, when you're testing people's stool, oh, they're showing high amounts of this could be something. Now we can say, okay, this is an indicator for, possible risk for whatever disease is correlated with it, which is really great. So you have a little bit of a heads up as far as like starting with, okay, there's a lot of dysfunction when it comes to the gut and like the microbiome. It sounds like it's pretty common. So what are some of we talked about the overtraining or maybe like very extreme sports, but what are some of the other things that we're doing as a culture that are leading us to be dysfunctional with our gut?
I mean, our Western diet, the highly processed food, is probably one of the number one drivers. And then the overuse of antibiotics, because antibiotics are indiscriminate. So they kill both the good and the bad bacteria. And so, you end up depleting the whole system. And it's those good bacteria that are kind of keeping us healthy. They also function as a kind of a pharmacy inside our gut, and they're producing the B vitamins, vitamin K, neurotransmitters, all kinds of hormones. So a lot of the production and movement of molecules is going on via the bacteria in the gut. So if you don't have a healthy, diverse microbiome, then you're losing some of these functions. And over time, that can worsen, especially if you are doing a lot of antibiotics or you are eating a very processed Western diet, little vegetables or high polyphenol foods. It's interesting too. I know a lot of people who have done ketogenic diets that have actually improved things in the short term, because that can starve some of those bacteria because you don't have any sugars. There's nothing fermentable going into the system. And that can be beneficial at one point. But if you do that long term, you're starving the good bacteria as well. And so, that's kind of a tricky space that I'm still kind of navigating through to kind of figure out how do you optimize. And maybe, we talk a lot about ancestral diets as opposed to the Western processed diet. But when we say ancestral or paleo diet, like whose ancestry? Because we all have different ancestry. And then if you really start to go and look at different parts of the world and what people historically ate, it's very different.
Yeah.
So paleo for one particular place may not really have a lot of animal protein, or it may only be fish because, they lived on the coast.
That's so interesting. I love talking about that because, yeah, like the people that are in a really cold climate are going to have a different ancestral diet than the people that were in a really hot climate. So I think that's so interesting. I love talking, you mentioned Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine. What do you see or what have you read about those types of diets? I don't know if you know this, but online right now, it is very popular. They are talking about the Chinese way of keeping, hot water instead of cold drinks and cooked foods versus raw foods. And it's like it's very trendy right now to be living like Chinese diet lifestyle type of things. And I always find it really interesting. I've talked about it on the podcast. I've always had an addiction to ice coffee and smoothies and all that. So I am really like having more soup and I'm drinking my hot water and all of that. But have you seen anything when it comes to that type of a diet versus anything else?
Well, I'm more familiar with the Ayurvedic aspects of hot and cold, and in your sort of pitta, which is fiery. They have 3 different doshas, and
Yeah.
depending on whether you're out of balance with one of those, you might eat more warming foods or warming drinks, or you might eat more cooling foods.
Yeah.
So, and at different times of the year, seasonally, you're going to balance those things very differently. So I think, I know less about the traditional Chinese medicine dietary thing, but I do think historically these cultural approaches did a much better job of understanding seasonality. And that's the other kind of thing I think about sometimes is, fruit. You have people who are, oh, it's too much sugar or whatever. Well, if you ate fruit like it actually ripened in the area where you are, we have these black raspberries that grow here along our fence line, but you can only get them for about 2 weeks. Because if you don't go pick and eat what little bit you're going to eat, the birds have eaten them and they're gone. And, now that we can go to the grocery store and get strawberries 365 days a year, we're not thinking about the signaling, because I think of food as information, and it should be, I think, information to your body about where you live, what the environment is, what the nutrient load is, what the light spectrum, like all of those layers of information are grown into the food so that when you eat the food, it's telling you, hey, kind of, this is where you are and this is what your resources are. And so, when you're eating a mango from halfway across the planet, maybe it's a little confusing to the system inside.
Yeah, and then just imagine what the system, how it reacts to Taco Bell. If it's confused about the mangoes, we're in trouble.
Yes.
I mean, it's so interesting. I wanted to ask you back to the antibiotics before we move on from that. If you have, okay, so personally, here's a personal story. I used to be on antibiotics a lot. Like my mom told me when you were a kid, they were always putting me on it. And then when I got to my 20s as a young adult, if I had a sniffle, I was at the doctor. I was always going to urgent care. I was always sick and I was always getting another round of antibiotics. I mean, it was like, I can't count how many times I took it. And as I got into my 30s and I started to learn more about health and everything, I really don't remember the last time I was on antibiotics. And thankfully, I haven't had to use them. But I mean, is it too late for me? Like, is my gut just like, can you repair like all the damage from years of going through this? And thankfully, my kids, they did not have this problem like I did. I don't even like maybe like such few times, if any. But for me and my gut, I've had health issues in my life and I am not, my mom and I always say, I wonder if it was from all those antibiotics.
I'll say there's probably a good chance that connection is related to those antibiotics. I will say you can make good progress restoring your ecosystem, but there are some antibiotics. So I mentioned Dr. Blazer's book called Missing Microbes. That's a great one to read. It's an older book, but it's the truth is still holds up today. But his ongoing research, I think, showed that there's a class of antibiotics called macrolides. And those antibiotics, the ecosystem does not recover from. So there are certain classes, and you take an antibiotic and it sort of kills everything off, but the system comes back and it's maybe a little less than it was, but it's pretty close to where it was before. And then you take them again. So you have this, cycle of destruction and restoration. So but it takes a pretty concerted effort to focus on and work with somebody and test and look at what's there and try to address, because probably you've got some antibiotic resistant, troublesome guys in there that you might have to kind of work around and deal with to try to restore the ecosystem and kick them out naturally, as opposed to trying, because antibiotics don't work. They're antibiotic resistant.
Oh, so what are some of the things, if somebody is listening and they're like, oh yeah, I had a lot of antibiotics as well. What are some of the things that we can start doing? I mean, you talked about the nutrition part. Is there anything else that we can do?
Well, so the antibiotics will also damage the lining of the gut, or something called the glycocalyx, which also surrounds all your blood vessels. And so there's a woman named Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride who developed something called the GAPS diet. It's pretty restrictive initially, but the GAPS diet is designed to restore that gut lining. So that's a really good initial step to take, and that has a lot of like bone broth, and that the glycocalyx is made of hyaluronic acid, and bone broth is high in hyaluronic acid. Doesn't sound like a fiber, but it actually is the only fiber that comes from animal. So all those connective tissues and everything are high in hyaluronic acid. So that's why a bone broth will give you more hyaluronic acid. So that's a great kind of step one to get your gut healed. And then you can move on to trying to add in things like fermented foods. If you can tolerate fermented foods, then trying to, just eat, even if you don't love the way they taste, even just eating a small bite of fermented foods, or having miso soup that has the live, miso is made from a fermented bean paste. Those types of things can start to help layer in a more complex microbiome. And then you can look at adding fibers and probiotics and other kind of pieces to try to restore the system. But like I try to use the example of like if you bought a farm that had been overworked and now it had a lot of weeds, it had been sort of neglected, but it had a lot of chemicals. It takes a little while to restore that ecosystem to a natural state.
Yeah. Oh, I love that, because I know if you're, severely impacted, I actually have experience with the specific carbohydrate diet. I don't know if you've heard of that, but
Yeah.
it's very similar to GAPS. I feel like I chose that. I chose that diet over GAPS just because GAPS seemed more intimidating, but it had an amazing result. So it was really, really great. And I remember even for my son, I would put like, when his stomach wasn't ready for the fermented foods, I would do like a splash of sauerkraut juice in his smoothies. And because that was enough, but it started getting him used to all of that. And that was really, really good.
So that
Go
specific
ahead.
carbohydrate diet, I think it's in Washington State or in Seattle, there's a medical group there that's treating a lot of children with gut issues with a specific carbohydrate diet. And they actually make a coconut milk yogurt out of our sugar shift probiotic as a part of that, what they give people on that specific carbohydrate diet, which is kind of interesting.
Oh, oh, I love that. I used to make yogurt with probiotics too. That's so fun. I love what you said about bone broth too. I didn't really realize that with the hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid is one of the best skin products too. And I drink bone broth, and it's fun to know now that that's another reason why bone broth is great for the skin. It helps your skin look so amazing. That's so interesting. Okay, so I want to ask you something that I feel like is another big topic that I saw on your website you have mentioned, which is sleep. And I'm so interested in my sleep. I'm so interested. The more I learn about it, the more I'm desperate to get good sleep. You say that it starts in the gut, sleep. So tell us what that means.
Well, so, a lot of people take melatonin. We make melatonin in our cells, but bacteria also make melatonin. And bacteria are also on a circadian clock in the body. And so you are producing, bacteria produce tryptophan, which is also helps you with sleep. I mean, you get it from your diet, but bacteria can also produce it. So we actually designed a probiotic to help support tryptophan production and bacterial melatonin to try to restore that kind of function that you've lost that's not working well. But really, one of the biggest disruptors of our sleep, well, two of the biggest disruptors, is this telephone here and the electromagnetic fields and the blue light and all of our screen time and actually not being outside when the sun rises in the morning or when the sun sets in the evening. So, like setting your circadian clock, like get up, drag yourself out of bed to go. I mean, it's hard in the wintertime, depending on where you are, because you might have to get up pretty early. Or actually, maybe it's when the time change. When they do the time change, you have to get up pretty
Yeah.
early. But
Yeah.
like get up and go, even if you just do it, like try it for a week, 10 days doing that, and you'll be amazed at how much better you sleep. And the other thing that I do is I actually turn off my Wi-Fi router in my house before I go to bed at night so that those electromagnetic fields aren't zapping through the house while I'm sleeping. Because, our body is picking up signals all the time. And, the more we can give that rest, the better quality sleep we're going to have. But I have had some people with our sleep product. In fact, I got somebody that wrote a review this week and put all their sleep scores before. So they have a Oura ring and they put their sleep scores before they were taking it. And what happened? And they were at a like 3.5 hour sleep deficit constantly. And they started taking simple slumber. And at the end of a week, all of their sleep deficit was gone and they were sleeping like twice the amount of deep sleep as they had been before.
Oh
So,
my gosh. Well, you're going to have to talk more about that, because I have a Garmin watch and I have a friend, and every morning we message each other. We're like, what was your sleep score? What do you like? We're playing detective. I was like, okay, it's very interesting. It's great to have the data, but sometimes you're guessing like, okay, why was my stress score like
So high.
so high? And then why, like, for example, I'm getting a lot of REM, but I don't get a lot of deep sleep. So, with the circadian rhythm and what you're talking about, and I've heard a lot of people talk about like turning off the router at night just to not have to deal with that, but kind of getting into your circadian rhythm and having your body help produce its own melatonin, those things can help. So, you're saying that'll help like the quality of our sleep so that we're getting varied, like the quality is higher and the things that we need are there. Like obviously my sleep score goes down because I don't have enough deep sleep. So could
Right.
all of that be related to the circadian rhythm or different things like that?
Yeah, all of those pieces kind of come together. But what a lot of people, so they think when they take melatonin before they go to bed. Well, actually, in our bodies, we make melatonin when we go out and look at the morning sun. So it's
Mm.
actually produced when we're looking at the morning sun, which is more the ultraviolet light spectrum, and then it is released in darkness. Well, we also don't, we're not in darkness anymore. So, trying to lower your light load before you go to bed, sleep in a room that is completely dark. I don't know very many people who sleep in a completely dark room anymore. There's electronic devices by the bed, there's night lights, all these different things, and I don't have any of that in my room. So my room is dark, and I don't have a watch, but I think I sleep. I think I sleep pretty well. I used to have an Apple Watch, and I got very briefly addicted to my data, and I said to myself, I think this is a problem. I don't want to
Yeah.
be a slave to this technology, and I put it in a drawer and never put it on again.
I know. You know what? I feel like I could ride that line sometimes. I have to be careful. And there are times where I'm like, I ended up walking all these steps last weekend and I got home and my watch is like, it's time for a move break. And I'm like, I just walked 10 miles today. What I'm done. I don't need a move. Like it's not, it's also, we have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Like it's not always accurate. I actually have a friend who does therapy for people who have trouble sleeping. And there's a real thing with these watches and these rings that there's anxiety inducing behaviors, from just, oh my gosh, I didn't
Got to
get
hear
enough
it
sleep.
before. Yeah.
Yeah. And it really affects them. I'm always just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Is it because I was on my screen last night? Is that why my stress was bad? Or did I have a glass of wine? And that's never a good thing with your sleep scores.
No.
So it's not ever good. I would love to hear more about your products and like if somebody's really like, I want to work on my gut health. This is so important. Like this is the root of so many issues with so many different things. And they really want to figure out how to boost their gut health. I'd love to hear first about the sleep one, of course, because, for selfish reasons. Please tell me about this.
So the sleep formula, it's called Simple Slumber.
Okay.
It's so well. First of all, let me take a step back. We design all of our probiotics as a team. So if you think like you go to the store and you look at the shelf with all these probiotics, they're just a handful of strains that are sold by three major suppliers, and most of the probiotics on the shelves are those in different mixes with different labels on them, and they're not designed as a working team. So like I said, your gut is kind of a factory, and what's happened with all the damage we've done, we've lost some of the key players in the team that builds the car, or builds the bus, or builds the airplane, or whatever it is you want to make. And so let's take sleep for an example. So sleep is one of the cars, and we design using software. We know the different bacteria and the different things they make. So what vitamins they make, do they make melatonin, do they make tryptophan, like what amino acids can they make, kind of what's their profile of capabilities, and we put them in our software system and build these teams that work together to put back a function that you've lost. So if you think about sleep, so that's, you want to produce calming neurotransmitters, you want to produce tryptophan, you want to produce melatonin, and you want to have that last, no more than 7 or 8 hours because you don't want to wake up groggy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's how we designed that simple slumber product with a group of organisms that work together to do that. So they support that tryptophan pathway and the bacterial melatonin. So, and that's actually our second best selling product. Our best selling product is a product called Sugar Shift, which was the product that I originally made for my husband. Um, it can it converts glucose and fructose, which we have way too much of in our modern diet. And glucose and fructose are two sugars that actually can go through something called the Maillard reaction, which is browning. So, like if somebody goes to get HbA1c tested, that is testing glycation products on your red blood cells. That is the browning of sugars attached to your red blood cells. So glucose and fructose are the sugars that do that. But our product converts glucose and fructose into mannitol, which actually doesn't glycate. So, and we just pee it out. So we designed that for him and showed in his gut that it was moving back closer and closer to a healthy human microbiome. And then we ended up doing a clinical trial in diabetes because Parkinson's and diabetes both shared that endotoxin marker. So we measured all, and about 50 to 60% of people with Parkinson's have some kind of insulin dysregulation. So we thought, okay, diabetes, it has easier endpoint markers. So we showed in our clinical trial that we improved fasting and postprandial blood glucose, triglycerides, something called HOMA-IR, which is measuring your improvement of insulin sensitivity. It lowered insulin, but we also measured the endotoxin in the blood, serum endotoxin, and that was one of the markers that moved the most at 3 and 6. By 6 months, it was almost entirely gone. So we had restored the gut to an anaerobic environment and kicked out all those bad bacteria that are producing the endotoxin. But that's one, like the simple slumber product, you can take that and you'll know this works for me. Like, the first night you take it. The Sugar Shift product, you're kind of committing to it. It's not like a hot date. It's more like a marriage because you're taking that to remodel the ecosystem, and that takes more time. So our trial was 90 days, and then we unblinded and kept some of the subjects on for 90 more days. So in that 180-day period was when we saw the complete drop off of the endotoxin.
That is so incredible. I'm so excited to try these. Okay, so if somebody wants to tell us where to find the products, first of all, and tell us where to get, go ahead.
So you can find we have them on our website. So that is biotiquest.com. That's BIOTIQUEST.com. You can also find them on Amazon. We'd rather you buy them from us, but if you are a big Amazon fan, we're happy for you to buy them there. Not all of our products are available on Amazon, but Simple Slumber and Sugar Shift are. We also have a new product that we introduced called Perfect Peace for stress and anxiety, which is great. So it helps with the calming neurotransmitters, the GABA that will sort of, and that's another one where you can tell in about 20 minutes, you can feel it. But we have one for cardiovascular health called Heart Centered. The one for anxiety and mood is called Perfect Peace. And we do have one for after you've taken antibiotics or if you have had a long course of it, and it's called Antibiotic Antidote. And then we have one we recommend more for like people if they're going to go on foreign travel or if they've gotten food poisoning or something. That's called Ideal Immunity. And it has a particular strain in it that is very effective at knocking out all the foodborne pathogens.
I want all of them. I was just thinking, like, I have a family member who just went on antibiotics. I'm like, that is so good to know, because I always hear people say, oh, I had to go on antibiotics, I had an infection, and then they're like, I need to do something about it. You do need to do something about it. You do need to start taking something afterwards, and to actually have something that has, it's not just, you're not just pulling something off a shelf, like this was designed for that, is so exciting. And I'm just like, I'm going to be placing a big order. So thank you so much for sharing all of this. You are a wealth of knowledge when it comes to all of this information. Like, thank you for sharing it with us. It was completely fantastic. And I can't wait to try the products.
Well, thank you for having me. And I look forward to hearing back from you how you like them.
I will. I'll let you know. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.